You're now watching the Mike Missanelli podcast on the BetRivers Network.
Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Mike Missanelli podcast. Boy, this is a special podcast today because we are going to preview the Phillies season with three absolute experts, two of which are pounding it out every day at spring training. The other who was down there for a couple of weeks with some great insight and some great stories. So let's welcome in Todd Zolecki, who covers the Phillies for MLB.com. Scott Lauber covers the Phils for the Inquirer, and Mr. John Clark from NBC Sports Philadelphia. How you doing, fellas?
Doing well, Mike.
I'm doing great. It's sunny. It's warm. I'm in Florida, and there's baseball, which is all good.
Yeah, I'm not doing as well as them because I'm back up here in the snow, Mikey. Mess with you.
Yes, maybe. Like I was wondering how long it would take to rub it in that they're in Florida where it's nice and warm. So thank you, Todd. I appreciate that. So let's talk about the Phillies and where they are right now. I know it's early; they haven't played yet, but your general thoughts about how they look, what their attitude seems to be in general. We'll start with you, Todd. What are you seeing right now from the time they showed up over these the last couple of weeks of workouts?
You know, I think there's a little bit of an edge in camp. That's kind of the vibe I've gotten in talking to the players. The way that the season ended, I mean, they know they should not have blown the NLCS to the Diamondbacks. They know they were the better team, and they know they wasted a great opportunity. So I think they come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I think they've heard all the talk about, wow, you guys are going to run it back with the same group. And I think they like that. And I think that they believe they can win it all with the same group, because that's been the talk, right, all offseason. Well, you got to add. You fell short again. You have to add. And to a man, everybody down here seems to think that they have enough to win with what they have. They just need to be a little bit better.
Scott, you feel the same way? Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, look, we heard from Rob Thompson back in December, right, where he said, I didn't watch a single pitch of the World Series. And we saw him in January, and he felt very similar, like he hadn't really gotten past the NLCS yet. And I don't think that they're, necessarily still reliving it or anything like that. But I do get the feeling that a lot of the players sort of felt the way Rob Thompson did, like it was theirs for the taking last year, and they didn't finish the job. And so I think that I agree. I think that they're very happy that the same group's back together again. They get a chance to do that. You don't often get a chance to kind of be the same team that you were a year ago. Most often there are changes that are made, and I think that they're looking forward to having a chance to right a situation that they let get away from themselves last October.
Johnny, I know you've been down there for a couple of weeks studying what's going on, and you're in a unique position because you had to pick out a story of what you see, what you think is going to be entertaining in those 2 weeks. So what has stood out to you as you're looking to do stories down there?
Well, first full squad workout, everybody back together. I completely agree with what Todd and Scott said that, a couple players said to me, wow, John Middleton, the owner, gave a fiery speech, passionate, emotional. And he basically said what he told the team back in 2009, Ryan Howard and some of the guys, get me my effing trophy back. So he told the entire team, go get it. It's time. And the guys were like, wow. And not only do they want to win a World Series this year, that they used the word dynasty. JT Realmuto used the word dynasty. And it's interesting because Bryce Harper, he used the word, we have a window here. Now, to me, that means this year and next year, basically, with the contract situations of a lot of guys. But he said we have a window. And I think they know for this group together, running it back, it's this year or next year. There's a window here. So I agree completely with these guys that ownership has set them up with everything they need. They had a missed opportunity last year, and everybody's there. Everybody's healthy, ready to go. Bryce Harper's not hurt this year. They've got everybody ready to go. And so it's on them, and I think they know that.
Yeah, I'll say this, just to add to what John said. I mean, John and Todd will tell you that John Middleton is pretty ubiquitous down here during spring training. Like, he's out watching workouts and bullpens, and just talking to him the other day, the word he used to describe how he felt about the opportunity that they let slip last October was angry. He said, I'm angry, and I want people around us, around this team, to be angry too, because I think if you're not angry at what happened last year, losing game 6 and 7 at home to a team they feel like they were better than, He's like, then I don't know what you're here for. So he's angry. He's very much motivated, and I think a lot of players feel the same way, that they're sort of using it as fuel, and that only goes so far. Eventually, you've got to get out there and play. But I do think that that they don't lack for motivation. That's for sure.
If this was that ESPN afternoon show, Scott, you would get some points for ubiquitous. It's such an Inquirer word, but very nicely done.
Thank you.
So now let's listen. Last year it was an epic meltdown. It was an epic meltdown because they really lost their focus offensively. They had bad at bats, and they just kind of panicked. Basically, they showed that their offensive versatility wasn't that great towards the end. And these are all veteran players that probably should know better. So I'm curious to know if that's been brought up, and where is Kevin Long's role in all of that?
Well, it's funny. I just talked with Kevin Long today about that and how they plan to reduce the massive swing and miss at the chase. You heard a lot about chase right after the postseason, how they just swung at everything outside the strike zone. And he said, listen, it's a mindset. I think it kind of snowballed on these guys during the season, or in the postseason and the NLCS, certainly with Trea Turner. He swung and missed and chased way more than he has in the past. Nick Castellanos, same thing. Johan Rojas, same thing. They think that they can work on these things and get these guys to correct themselves and just get better. And they think that they have it's a mindset thing. There's some mechanical adjustments, sure, but I think as that NLCS got deeper and deeper, I think those guys just felt more and more pressure. Now, how do you prevent that again in the postseason from happening? I don't know, but they believe that it is something that they can correct, and they're working on it now. A guy like Kyle Schwarber, for instance, he swung. He got into way too many two-strike counts last season. They want him to be more aggressive earlier in the count, and so there's little things that they're trying to tweak, little adjustments that they think that they can make, so they don't lose to a team like the Diamondbacks.
It's funny you say mindset, because baseball is all about mindset, and you can do all you want in spring training and in practice and in drills with your hitting instructor. When you get in that box, it's survival of the fittest, and sometimes you resort to not focusing on those mechanical adjustments. It's almost like golf, where you take a lesson in golf and you get 7 different things in your head, and you go back to what's comfortable for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about when you're playing, you're standing in the tee box, and you're like, just don't shank it here, just don't shank it here, because and then it's in your head. I'm sure Nick Castellanos in the postseason was sitting there going, do not swing at this pitch. It's going to be outside. If it's outside, don't swing at it. And he just couldn't help himself swinging. And that's a challenge they have to overcome too, is sometimes it's just in your DNA to be a free swinger.
Scott?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. It's not like all of a sudden Trea Turner and Nick Castellanos are going to turn into different style hitters, or it's not like that they're going to go against what's been successful for them throughout their careers just because they had 7 bad games against the Diamondbacks. So it is a mindset, and I'm sure it can be tweaked, but some of that is they're going to have to live with, right? I mean, some of that up and down, some of that inconsistency, they're going to have to live with. I think, got to give the Diamondbacks credit for pitching them well as well after Game 2. I mean, I remember after Game 2 writing about how the Phillies, had these great hitters meetings, and they were so locked in as a lineup and as an offense, and then the next 5 games they did nothing, and that's as much about the Diamondbacks as it is about them. So I do think that Arizona pitched them well and maybe exploited some of what they perceived as things they could seize upon, weaknesses of the Phillies. And yeah, I mean, they can adjust their mindset, but you're also not going to change the kind of hitters that a lot of them are and have been throughout their careers.
You're listening to the Mike Missanelli podcast. We have 3 guys that cover the squad: Scott Lauber, the Inquirer; Todd Zolecki, MLB.com, covering the Phillies; and John Clark from NBC Sports Philadelphia. So let's talk about the running it back, because there's a lot of general managers that, and it's easy for us to say, let's run it back. They're a good team. They've got really good players that are coming back. But there's also the school of thought that even if you're a good team and you melt like that, you need to keep fresh, even if you freshen it up in a little bit of a way. It doesn't look like they're doing that. So, I mean, I don't know what Dombrowski's philosophy is that way, but they certainly are running it back with the same. And some people think that's unhealthy. Some people in baseball would say that's unhealthy. Your thoughts?
Well, go back to after the Phillies won the World Series, Raul Ibanez came in, Pat Burrell was gone, and you had a switch there. I think it's the situation with all the money they have tied up here. I mean, after a while, you've added so many big money players that you just can't keep adding $300 million players. Now, as Scott reported it, and I heard as well, they went hard after Yamamoto because that was a unique case, a guy who could be here for a long time, and they thought he'd be great. And they also, I believe, went after Jordan Hicks really bad, and it just didn't work out. So they did try to add. They lost out on a couple of these. But in this situation, you've got a lot of $20 million players, and you have to run it back. And re-signing Aaron Nola, I did think that was huge because he easily could have gone to the Braves. There was a big possibility of him going to the Braves. So that's huge that Aaron Nola is coming back. And I think some people take that for granted. I mean, imagine if Aaron Nola went to the Braves. It'd be stunning. So I think in this situation, you have one of the better lineups in the National League. You have one of the better rotations in the National League. They did try to add a closer. And, hey, they have a trade deadline, and I think they'll be active. But I think there is something to be said for how tight this clubhouse really is and having a shared experience like that, because they all kind of came together. The free agents that they added went to the World Series. And then last year it was all set up. Maybe expectations got the best of them. Game 6 and Game 7 at home, squeezing the bat a little too tight, doing things out of the strike zone. But I think having that shared experience, they kind of look at each other like we're not letting that happen again. And, I think running it back is the right move.
Yeah, and of course they did mix it up with Merrifield, so that's a fresh breath of fresh air coming in there. So you guys brought up the Yamamoto thing, and great reporting by you guys. And but here's the thing about Middleton, the fact that he admits that readily, sometimes I don't think it does him any good. But since that's already out there are two guys out there that could really add to their starting rotation. And if you're willing to go throw that kind of money around, why wouldn't you throw it around for one more guy? And, of course, the two guys I'm talking about are Snell and Montgomery. So from your perspective, guys, what is that still a possibility or not?
I don't think so. Look, Yamamoto was an exception because of his age and what they perceived as just really super talent. I mean, they were willing to go to a place for him that I don't believe that they will even go anywhere near for the other two guys, Snell or Montgomery, who are older, and I don't think that they think that those guys are as good. So, I mean, look, I think that their priority now is locking up Zack Wheeler to an extension, getting that done, and moving forward with Wheeler and Nola at the top of the rotation. I think if they feel like they need help in the rotation, they're confident they can get it later on at the trade deadline. So, no, I don't put Snell and Montgomery in the Yamamoto group and say like, well, they were going to spend for Yamamoto, so why not just allocate those resources to these other guys? I think that they viewed Yamamoto as a special case.
I mean, I'm sure Scott and John have heard the same thing. I think the Phillies don't have any interest really in Blake Snell because you look at his career. Yes, 2-time Cy Young winner. I'm not poo-pooing that. But other than those 2 Cy Young years, he's never pitched, I think, more than like 135 innings in a season. So you're going to drop 7 years, $210 million on a guy that doesn't seem to pitch that much that often. I think that kind of scares the Phillies. And, Jordan Montgomery, if a A.J. Burnett situation pops up where miracle of miracles, he's like, I'll take a 1-year deal, then yeah, maybe, or a 2-year deal, maybe. The Phillies that's how they got A.J. Burnett several years ago. They got Jake Arrieta when the market dried up for him at 3 years, $75 million. Won't be that cheap, I don't think. But that to me is the only way that they add another starting pitcher at this point.
There's a lot of Boris clients that are just hanging out there, waiting for something to happen. Yeah. It's a two-part question. Is there a Boris backlash going on right now?
I just don't think he has the offers right now, and so he's really he's not afraid to play it out. I mean, I think when did Harper sign a few years ago? It was at the end of
late February.
March
It was
16th,
late. It was
mid-March,
definitely
right?
late. Yeah, it was late. It was late February. It was late
Or late
February
February?
for
Oh.
for Harper.
Oh, wow.
So I don't think he's afraid to do that. And I don't know if there's a backlash so much as that he still thinks he's going to get Blake Snell 200 some million, and teams are going, we're not giving this guy 200 million.
By the way, Mike, when you walk into the Phillies clubhouse, you see about 6 or 7 big, huge boxes. It says Boris on the side of the boxes. I don't know, is it like a spring training care package for his guys there? But they're all over the clubhouse.
He has a lot of guys in that Phillies clubhouse. And yeah, I mean, you do wonder at a certain point, did he overplay his hand on some of these guys? And are they going to get the deals that he thinks that, what amazes me is that this happens, maybe not with 4 guys, but I mean, this happens every offseason, it seems like, where Boris will take a client or two, a high profile client or two into spring training unsigned. And, you never hear about guys panicking and taking below market deals. He seems to get them to think the money will be there for them. Don't worry if we hold out a little while. So we'll see if he can get it now for 4 guys. You mentioned Snell and Montgomery, but Cody Bellinger and Matt Chapman as well. So, I mean, did he overplay his hand on 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of these guys? We'll see.
Yeah, I was thinking of Bellinger when I brought up the Boris. He's too good of a player to be out there dangling, but we'll see if he gets what he wants for him. Now, let's talk about the big Boris client, because Bryce Harper now with the talk of the extension, which I find really odd at this point. And I'm thinking maybe that's more product of Boris than it is from Harper, because he's so happy to have this contract when he signed it with the Phillies and be here for life. And now it's not adequate enough. What do you guys feel about this?
Well, I want to say one thing, because Todd and I talked about this after Bryce spoke. And Mike, in negotiations, sometimes when you really want one thing, you're asking for some of the other things, and you hopefully will get back to where, look, basically he wants some more money. That's my personal opinion. His average annual value is not where it should be for his production. Now, he could have had the opt-out, gotten more money like Manny Machado, and that was on him, and that was great. That was great for Philadelphia and for the Phillies, but I think he would like some more money. So when you're asking to be extended another 3 or 4 years, maybe next year they meet somewhere where, okay, we'll give him an extra $4 million a year, whatever, get that average annual value above $30 million. But I do think it doesn't look good publicly when you're saying, hey, I want a new contract into my 43, 40, 44-year-old season. But I do think he's about getting more money because he feels he deserves it. He feels he's the thing that stirs the drink with the Phillies, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong. So I think maybe that's where they'll wind up if they have some meeting on a middle ground.
I was going to say, I'm not surprised that this is what he wants. I'm a little bit more surprised at the timing of all of this. Look, it was a little more than a year ago that he showed up at spring training. Remember, he was a few weeks late last year because he was rehabbing his elbow. And he said, I think it was the first time I'd heard him say it. He said, I want to play into my 40s. And, you don't have to be a mathematician to calculate the contract and go, he's only under contract through his age 38 season. So something's going to have to happen here. So it's been on his mind for a while that he wants to get into his 40s. And I thought, okay, there will come a time, maybe after they win a World Series, where he says, all right, look, we've won the World Series. I've done everything through my first however many years of the contract it's been at that point. Like I moved to first base for you now. Let's talk about maybe getting me through my 40th birthday and, maybe bump my salary up a little bit because my AAV is now 46th or whatever it is in baseball. And we know I'm better than the 46th best player. So I thought we'd get to that point. I just didn't think we'd get to it now prior to them winning, prior to, him, now making the full-time move to first base. I thought it was going to be down the line a little bit.
Here's the thing that's interesting to me, Todd. Professional sports has gotten to the point where it doesn't matter how much money you get in a long-term contract. With the AAV, now Harper's smart enough to know that AAV was probably going to fall way down as the years went on and the salaries go up. He probably knew his AAV was going to be lower than most of the stars in this league. So they reserved the right to say, okay, I did sign the 10-year security contract for a lot of money, but I always have, if I'm a star, I always reserve the right to say, give me a little more. Is that accurate in your world?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the way he feels, and I know for sure that's the way Scott Boras feels. It's no surprise at the winter meetings last year. I remember when Scott Boras first mentioned this, he said, "There's no better metric than John Middleton saying Bryce Harper's contract is a tremendous bargain." And then you go, oh boy, because John said that last year during the postseason, said that to Bryce, you're such a bargain, your contract. So you knew Scott Boras heard that and he was going to use it to his advantage. And, the interesting thing I will say is that Bryce mentioned this, and it does not, he said, so far, when Scott and I have talked to Dave about this, so far they've only been really talking to Dave Dombrowski about this. It has not gotten up to John Middleton, where Scott's calling John every 5 minutes going, where's our contract renegotiation? So when does it get to that point? It probably gets to that point after Zack Wheeler signs his contract extension, and if there seems to be no movement with Dave Dombrowski. Now, Dave has been very careful in his words. He has said, I'm not really going to talk about it, but the one thing he said last year at the winter meetings, which caught my attention, I asked him, have you ever done a contract renegotiation in the middle of a multi-year deal? He said, never. And he said, now listen, this did not catch me off guard, and they are entitled to feel how they want to feel right now. So you didn't seem to be too worried about it.
And I will say it was very interesting, another quote from Scott Boras, where he said Bryce should not be penalized for not having an opt-out. So to me, what that says is that Scott, of course, wanted the opt-out all along. Bryce didn't. And they kind of want that contract that Manny Machado and other guys have gotten with the opt-out. So it's like, okay, we did you a favor. Bryce did you a favor by not having the opt-out. So don't penalize him for not having it. Help him get some more money that he should have gotten with the opt-out.
There's a reason, though, why Scott Boras tells people he invented the opt-out, for Alex Rodriguez back in 2000, whatever that was, when he signed with the Rangers and opted out, opted out when he got to the Yankees and re-signed the next. I mean, because in baseball, they don't do what, Boras mentioned at the winter meetings that, Bryce has brought up Patrick Mahomes, right, who restructured his deal with the Chiefs in the middle of it. And they don't do that in baseball. It's just not done. As Todd said, Dave Dombrowski's been in front offices for 40 plus years and has not done a renegotiation like that. So there's a reason why Boras invented the opt-out for guys to kind of lean on these teams a little bit to redo their deal in the middle. Bryce doesn't have that. And one of the reasons he doesn't is because when he was with the Nationals, he was worn down, quite frankly, by the, who's he going to play for next and where's he going to go after Washington? So when he signed as a free agent, he didn't want to invite that sort of speculation into his next team. He wanted to be with a team for a long time. And now, 5 years into it, I'm sure he wishes he had an opt-out, but he doesn't. And so it's hard to leverage the Phillies.
I could just see Boras being kept up at night knowing that Harper's AAV is like in the 40s. And that's the kind of thing that would make him lose sleep and like burn his rear end. So I really think that's kind of the motivation for this whole thing. But in any event, since we're talking about contracts and you brought up Zack Wheeler, what are we talking about here? Are the Phillies best waiting, or are the Phillies better off to get it done right now? And, what kind of numbers are we talking about for a guy like Wheeler?
I think they're better. I think it's way better for them to get this done right now. I know they were optimistic last spring they were going to get Aaron Nola done, but, Aaron has some warts on his resume, like the ERA's jumped up 2 out of the last 3 years. He's struggled late in the season. Zach you could look at the traditional stats. You can look at the modern stats like WAR. He is arguably one of the top 3 pitchers in baseball over the last 4 years. And so if Zack Wheeler gets to free agency, there's going to be a lot of teams lining up, I think, unlike Blake Snell and unlike Jordan Montgomery. A lot of teams going, you want $250 million? You want $270 million, we will give this to you, Zack Wheeler. Come play for us. So I think the Phillies want to get it done. Interestingly, though, I think that Zack is open to taking a shorter-term deal to get that high AAV. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if he had average annual value in the $40 million, along with Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. And I think the floor for him is Garrett Cole, Steven Strasburg, Jacob deGrom in the $35 million range.
Wow. So you're saying 40 mil a year if it was a shorter term contract?
Yeah, I think like a 3-year deal with an option, $40 million a year. I could see him signing something like that. But if it's a little bit of a longer term deal, then I think maybe it drops down into the poorhouse of Garrett Cole and Jacob deGrom and Steven Strasburg.
Yeah, I agree with that. Earlier in the offseason, I thought Garrett Cole was the ceiling because Garrett Cole and Zack Wheeler's numbers the last 4 years are very, very similar. But ultimately, I agree with Todd. I think it's the floor because Garrett Cole got that AAV and it was a long-term deal and it was 7 years or 8 years. Zack Wheeler is not looking for 7 or 8 years, but he wants 3 or 4. And I think the model there is Verlander and Scherzer, who got $43 million a year for. I think Verlander was 2 years and Scherzer was 3, and Zack Wheeler can certainly stake a claim to being as good as those guys. He's younger than them, and so if that's what he wants, I don't know. I think it could get to that point for sure. Especially if it's a 3-year deal, I think the Phillies would probably be open to that.
All right, guys, let's talk about the team in general because it's pretty set up. I mean, except for a couple spots. Now, I look at the roster and I go, okay, they might not be secure with their 4th starter, but Taijuan Walker is going to be the 4th starter. Who's going to be the 5th starter? And when I look at the bullpen, I see there might be 2 spots open, and the candidates there for that would be Brogdon and Covey and Marte and Nelson. But how do you see the 5th starter playing out right now? Will it be Turnbull?
It'll be Christopher Sanchez.
Oh, I forgot about Christopher Sanchez.
Yeah, he's number 5 if they're all healthy.
Yeah, I completely forgot about him. So Turnbull will be a bullpen guy. Or maybe if Taijuan Walker falters, he could find his way into the rotation.
I think Turnbull is a bullpen long guy or a AAA depth guy. He's got an interesting contract situation where just by virtue of being having 5 years of major league service, he has to give his consent to get sent to AAA. He hasn't pitched a lot in the last couple of years because of injuries, and I think there's a sense that maybe he would give that consent in order to just get innings under his belt. If not, they could keep him as a long man and keep him stretched out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, certainly they view him as, maybe their number 6 starter, but definitely rotation depth, which they did not enter spring training with much of, and he would be a big part of that.
Okay, so if he is in the pen, and you get Dominguez, Alvarado, Soto, Strahm, Hoffman, Kerkering, who else?
I think you could have Connor Brogdon. I think is a guy that they're counting on for sure. I should say for sure, but I think he has an advantage in that he's talented. He's pitched with them with success. He did not pitch very well last season. They think he's due for a bounce back. And a big thing when you always look at opening day roster construction is who's got options left. Well, Connor Brogdon does not have an option remaining. So if he does not make the team, you probably lose him. I would be stunned if he was designated for assignment and another team didn't claim him on waivers. So that to me gives Connor Brogdon a huge head up above everybody else. Dylan Covey's another guy that is out of options. I think that puts him in the running for maybe to compete with Turnbull for that long man job. Turnbull would agree to go to AAA. I could see Covey getting that spot, and I know a lot of people killed Covey last year when the way he started. He actually was okay late in the season as a long guy. I mean, you want your long guy to just mop up some innings. If you're relying on your long guy to win baseball games, you're probably not going to win a lot of baseball games. So I think Covey's in the mix as well, along with Brogdon and Turnbull.
There's always the one guy that Philly fans will pick on, It's like the guy, oh, no, they're going to bring Covey in. Or they're going to bring and he can't win a bet. They're waiting for the first thing to go back. Oh, see, I told you about Covey. He should be on this roster. It's like classic. He's got that
100%.
spot reserved for right now. All right, this is the Mike Missanelli podcast. It's a special baseball issue as we go into the season with the guys that cover the squad, Scott Lauber, Inquirer, Todd Zolecki from MLB.com, and Chris John Clark, NBC Sports Philly. I want to talk about Rojas for a second. Now, I watched him in the playoffs last year, and it's probably unfair to judge him on the playoffs when the pressure is high, when the pitchers are adjusted to whatever your flaws are. But he certainly looks to me like he needs a lot more at-bats, and I just don't trust him as a major league hitter. So you're watching him, and I know he worked out, he's stronger, all this kind of thing. They're working on him, bunting. I just don't see it right now until he goes to AAA and gets a lot of at-bats. And if that happens, how does that alter what their outfield's going to be?
So that's interesting because when I was talking to Dave Dombrowski the other day for an interview, he said it several times. If Johan doesn't make the team for the opening of the season, and so they now have Whit Merrifield, and if Johan Rojas, if they don't believe that he can hit on an everyday basis like you're talking about, maybe they do send him down because now they have a little insurance. Now they have a little protection where Brandon Marsh could play center and Merrifield could play left. I thought it was interesting that Dave did say if Johan Rojas does make the roster, because for me, I was like going into this spring, Johan's going to be your starting center fielder on opening day, but I think he definitely has to show some things, and he has to show improvement, the adjustments they're having him make. So I don't think it's a guarantee he's your center fielder on opening day. Do you agree with that, guys, from hearing things around spring training?
Yeah, I do. I think that he's going to have to show some signs of improvement. And I asked Rob Thompson, like, what are you going to be looking at? Are you going to be looking at stats? He's like, no, I'm going to need to see some better quality at bats, see him not chasing as much, seeing him hitting the ball hard. To me, though, when I look at Rojas, I think if he shows just enough to show some competence at the plate offensively, I think they really want him to be the center fielder because he is so good defensively. I kind of look at him like Carlos Ruiz in the 2008 Phillies. Ruiz hit ninth that year, and he was not good offensively. I think he hit like 215. His OPS was in the mid-600s. And Charlie Manuel every day was asked, how can you possibly keep Carlos Ruiz in this lineup? He is terrible. And finally, Charlie had enough. He said, listen, man, if we're relying on our 9-hole hitter to win, in other words, if Johan Rojas this season hits 225 with a 650 OPS and he plays Gold Glove caliber center field, I can see him playing pretty much every day in center field. You guys might, I don't know if you guys might disagree with me.
No, I'm sure that's the way they look at it. He's that good defensively that they can get away with it. But again, it always comes to a spot in the order. If you're in the playoffs and you need a good at bat and he can't give it to you, it derails stuff that you want to do with your lineup. I understand that you've got other hitters in the lineup, and I understand you can get away with a guy who's not that great a hitter. But he showed such a feeble ability to hit major league pitching that I just wonder if that's going to ever happen that he hits 225.
In the postseason, I would agree with you. When he was up for the last 2.5 months of the season, he gave them mostly competent at bats, and I think that was. Look, they called him up, and it was not supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be temporary. And I think the question they had was, well, how overmatched will he be at the plate? And he wasn't overmatched much at all. He looked like he belonged. He looked like a rookie, but he looked like he belonged. He did not look like he needed a lot more time in AAA. Now, that was not the case in the postseason, and I think that's the thing in spring training. How overmatched does he look? Or does he look like a confident enough hitter? You don't need him to carry the lineup. You don't need him to do much of that at all. You just need him to bat ninth and play his great defense. Todd brought up Carlos Ruiz once upon a time. The example that I keep thinking about, I've thought about for quite a while, is Jackie Bradley Jr. with the Red Sox when Dave Dombrowski took over there in 2015. Jackie Bradley was not much of a hitter at that point. but he was a terrific defensive center fielder. And I know that there were conversations within the Red Sox front office led by Dave Dombrowski, like how little can we get from this guy offensively and still run him out there every day? Like, what are the numbers? Is 225, 630, I think Todd said, is that enough given the defense? And I'm not sure if the Phillies, I mean, maybe internally they have a threshold and they say, well, it's got to be X, otherwise he's got to go to AAA. But, whatever it is, I think the bar is pretty low because his defense is that good. So I just think, again, like maybe they're back where they were when they first called him up. Like, let's just watch him and, make an evaluation about, like, what level of overmatched is he? And if it doesn't look that bad, let him go and let him play. I think that's what they want to have happen. And, if I were betting on it, that's kind of still what I would bet on. I'm sure the Merrifield thing maybe makes it a little bit easier for them to send Rojas to AAA if they feel like he's completely overmatched in spring. But, I think it's got to look really, really bad.
Merrifield to me, is so valuable to play every position to give guys rest that I don't know if you overextend him by having to play him in left field too much. But what if Rojas has to go down, is it incumbent upon Dombrowski to acquire somebody else? Because he's got Cave and Pache, and I'm wondering if that's enough.
I think they do like Pache. I think Dave likes him and believes he can play. But I think Brandon Marsh would probably move to center. That would be my guess. And then
he would move to center. And I'm wondering in left field, you probably couldn't make Merrifield an everyday left fielder because you really would have to use him in other capacities. So I thought, are they good enough with Pache and Cave in left field, or would they need to acquire somebody else?
I think in that scenario, Merrifield would be in left field. I mean,
every day as an everyday guy.
If Rojas doesn't make the team, I think so. I mean, look, they said in the offseason, like, they didn't want to block Rojas. And I remember at one point asking Dave Dombrowski, okay, how do you thread the needle between not blocking Rojas, but also covering yourself in the event that Rojas shows in spring training he's not ready to hit major league pitching yet? And he admitted it's a difficult needle to thread because most players that you'd be looking at for that spot want everyday at-bats, regular at-bats. And I think it's kind of the beauty of Whit Merrifield, so to speak. Like, he could, in theory, play every day in left field for a little while if Rojas has to go down and get at-bats and kind of get his swing together and all that. But if Rojas makes the team, he could kind of be your 10th man, so to speak, and sort of float around the field and play a lot of different places. So it's kind of the beauty of the kind of player that he is. So I think that's probably what they would do if Rojas has to go to AAA.
Yeah, I think they would roll it with Merrifield and left and see what Pache and Cave can give him, because Dave has also been very clear in terms of why signing an outfielder when they got Whit Merrifield. He kept saying over and over, we are not going to guarantee an outfielder playing time because we want to commit some at-bats to Rojas. So I think the idea, if Rojas would start the season in AAA, they would want him to come back at some point. So the idea of then going out and getting another outfielder to protect him in the left field, that might hurt Rojas's chances to play at some point. So I think they would just see how they could do it with Merrifield, Cave, Pache, Marsh, and left and center.
If Merrifield gets a majority of at-bats in left field if Rojas is down, does he lead off?
I think it's still going to be Kyle Schwarber.
Oh, you're darn right it is.
Yeah.
All right. Because there are a lot of people in baseball that think Whit Merrifield is a great leadoff hitter. And I'm just wondering if that alters their thinking that he could handle that spot better. And I know what the numbers say with Schwarber as the leadoff. I'm just wondering if they would change their thought process.
But wait. You think that they would give Merrifield the leadoff spot over Trea Turner?
I don't think I'm asking the experts that we have on this beautiful panel.
I mean, I think
whether they
I think Trea Turner wants to lead off. Now, if Kyle Schwarber's not leading off, I would think it's going to be Trea Turner, because you can't then go to a third option and say, Trea, no, you're not leading off. It's going to be Whit Merrifield. That's just my opinion.
Well, listen, Whit Merrifield's a hit machine, so I'm just wondering then where do you post him in a lineup?
Two-hit Whit. No, I think I think Trea Turner wants to hit in the same spot all the time, if possible. I don't think he cares if it's first or second or even third. I just think he would rather be in a consistent spot. And I think when Rob Thompson looks at it, he comes back to the same thing over and over again. They win when Kyle Schwarber bats leadoff. So it doesn't matter that he doesn't run like Ricky Henderson or hit above 200. There's a kind of magic that they have with him at the top of the lineup, and I think it's hard to get away from.
I can't disagree with that. I'm just curious to know then, in what spot would they hit Merrifield, do you think? Would that be more of the bottom of the order type of guy?
Maybe 6th, 7th?
Yeah, I mean, you wonder if they would bump down Marsh to 9th in that scenario. Do you hit him 8th? I mean, it's a nice problem to have. The lineup is really deep. I mean, so there's not it's not an insult for Whit Merrifield to hit low in the lineup. And if you do look at his numbers the last 2 seasons, he probably should be hitting in the lower half of the lineup. I feel like the way he kind of finished last season, he kind of struggled at the end. So yeah, I think they have. I think probably 7th, 8th, 9th, somewhere
Maybe
down there. I think
9th,
he would go.
and he's what do they always say? 9th is kind of like you have a leadoff hitter at the bottom, right? And then
You want to have somebody on base for Schwarber.
Exactly, not the worst thing in the world to have some speed on the bases in front of Schwarber.
All right, you convinced me. Just a couple other things here. I want to talk about where they stand in the National League. I think their over/under number in Vegas is 89. I assume that we're still looking at the Braves in the number 1 spot. Where did and Dodgers obviously? So where did the Phillies figure? Do they figure as the 3rd best team in the National League right now?
I think so.
I think so. I can't see another team in the National League better than the Phillies, other than the Dodgers and the Braves. Personally,
I agree.
And here's a fascinating thing. I believe the Phillies have finished 14 games behind the Braves each of the last 2 years, right?
Correct.
Could the Phillies possibly eliminate the Braves for a 3rd straight year in the playoffs? You've heard the Braves all off season. Spencer Strider says we got to re-examine everything we're doing. We're the best, 100 wins or more in the regular season, and we get eliminated each year. That's going to be a very difficult task for the Phillies to eliminate the Braves for a 3rd straight year.
Yeah, and they freshened up a little bit too to get rid of the ghost of that whole thing. So, but they're strong. No question that they're very strong. So, okay, so the 3rd best. That's not bad. This podcast is sponsored by BetRivers. I have my app right here. So when I ask you about the 89, are you going over or under? I need some information here.
I would take the over, and maybe I'm a fool, but I do believe that this team will get off to a better start this year than last year. I do think having Real Muto, Schwarber, Turner, Taijuan Walker, Ranger Suarez at the WBC set him back a little bit. Certainly with Suarez, he was injured. Bryce Harper is going to be healthy, 100% healthy coming into this season. I think that's going to be important. And, I just think that they're motivated. So I think having Harper healthy and having those guys not in the WBC, I think will help them get off to a better start.
Yeah, and aren't you a little surprised, Mikey Miss, that they won 90 games last year and the over-under is 89? Maybe it should be 90-91?
Vegas is always conservative that way.
Yeah.
They don't think you're going to come back the next year as strong after you lose, like you lost in the NLCS.
But
most people,
yeah, but to Todd's point, I mean, you think about April and May again last year, how they started off slow, then they put Schwarber in the leadoff spot. I mean, you're talking about Trea Turner kind of being comfortable from the get-go this year. I mean, he was really pretty poor in the leadoff spot to start the season. So now you're talking about Trea Turner coming in more comfortable. And Bryce Harper, I think that's huge because I think Bryce, of course, not only brings it at the plate, but he's bringing that vibe.
Yeah. And another thing I'll say, another thing is if Rojas makes the team, right, you're going to have Kyle Schwarber at DH. Don't undersell how good that defense is in left and right with Marsh and Rojas. I think that also will be a big boost to them the first couple months of the season, just having a much better defense on the field.
And by the way, last year's opening day lineup, it was crazy because I wanted to look this up. I mean, if you think about it, you go back to opening day last year, you remember first baseman Derek Hall was there.
Yeah.
And then you had Cave in left, you have Marsh in center. So if you just look at what you're bringing on opening day, I think you're in a much, much stronger position. As I said, Trea Turner to me, being at the top of that lineup, whether it's one or two, and him being comfortable, I think you're going to see more of second half Trea than you saw at the beginning of last year.
You mentioned, could they really beat the Braves for the third year in a row? Can they really get off to such a poor start for a third year in a row?
Right.
I mean, and there were, as Todd said, there were tangible reasons why it happened last year. Guys being away at the WBC and Bryce Harper being hurt. 22 and 29 or whatever it was 2 years ago, and 28 and 33 or whatever it was last year. Like, could that really possibly happen again? And if it doesn't, if they're just even a few games better than that, they're going to beat the over under mark of 89. So yeah, I'd go over 2 and just expect that it's not going to be that bad for a third year in a row in April and May.
I'm gonna put the bet in right now, Scott.
Go for it.
You're on the hook.
Go for it.
Right.
What, you didn't trust Todd or me when we said it?
No.
Yeah, well, but all of you. I'm going to hold you all responsible. So if I bet 300, you're in for 100 apiece.
All right, it's a deal. We're all in it.
Last question, and this has nothing to do with the Phillies on the field. It has to do with your professions. Since I've been in journalism, and that includes like 15 years in newspapers and 10 with the Inquirer, I've always said that the hardest job in sports journalism is being a baseball beat writer. There's not even anything close to what you guys do. And I go back to the days where the baseball writers that covered the Phillies were really nasty to each other. You guys seem like really congenial. You all get along. You're all pals. And I wonder, because I remember a guy like Peter Pasquarelli. I don't know if any of you guys remember.
I know.
I mean, he went to war every time he was covering a beat. So he didn't like he wanted to beat the other guy. He wasn't friendly with the other guy. But the climate has certainly changed in media. But you still have a job to do. And I wonder how you negotiate the friendships that you have with the competitiveness that you have to exhibit.
Boy, I think it comes down to just personalities. I think a lot of those guys back in the day, they were just really crusty dudes. I remember my first year covering the Phillies for the Inquirer, 2003. There was still some of that. Like, I remember specifically other beat writers from other papers kind of getting together and like sharing information so they could beat the Inquirer on a story. Like, I talked to this guy, I'll give it to you three guys. Don't tell the Inquirer because we don't want them to get it in the paper. I mean, there was still some of that stuff going on, which is pretty crazy. But I think now it's just, or I'm old, I got 3 kids, I can't get that angry about this stuff anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's just, I think it's just part of it for me.
Yeah, I'll say this too, Todd. You know this because you and I started roughly the same time. My first year covering the Phillies was 2006 for the Wilmington News Journal. There are a lot fewer of us now than there were then. Mm-hmm. Back then, right? I mean, all the suburban papers covered the team, and I mean every day. They were down here every day at spring training from the beginning to the end. Now it's like you can count us on one hand. So I don't know if that means we get sick of each other that much easier or if that makes us survivors. But, there's just it's changed so much.
But do you still try to beat each other on a story?
Oh, I can tell you from watching these two guys try to beat each other, it is a knockdown, drag out.
No. I think everybody's competitive for sure. But you know what I think has helped in a weird way? It's made my quality of life a lot worse is social media. Because back in the day, I feel like nowadays, in other words, if you get beat on a story, you get beat on the story by 5 minutes.
10 seconds. 10 seconds.
So John Clark puts something out there, or Scott Lauber puts something out there, Phillies do blah, blah, blah. Now I can just text a couple people and I get it up a few minutes later. Who cares?
Right.
The sickening feeling back in the day was, and you were always on edge, is waking up the next morning and seeing something on TV or seeing something in a paper, and now you are screwed for the next 24 hours.
Yes.
And you're the biggest loser on the planet for 24 hours. You can't overcome that, but now you can overcome it. Now I don't know who's like, when Zack Wheeler signs his contract extension, if you ask me a year from now who broke that story, I won't be able to tell you.
You know, it's funny, and young people listening to this are going to say, what? You waited 24 hours for information?
Yeah.
Like, it really is insane to me how long we waited. I remember when I was first in Philly, coming home, and my mentor, Gary Papa, he was awesome because he kind of showed me the ropes of everything. But I remember a couple times where Deuce Staley was a reporter for Channel 6 while he was playing, and Gary was at the airport when Deuce had held out. He finally was coming back to camp, and I showed up at the airport, and Gary wouldn't talk to me for 3 weeks, even though we were good friends. And there was another time in the Phillies locker room after a game where he was interviewing a player, and when it's open locker room, you're assuming it's open locker room. There's no like one-on-one or sit downs unless you can tell somebody was really waiting on this. But we go over and I put my mic in, and Gary slapped my mic out, even though we were good friends. So there is that competitive juice. But it's just so different now. I think Todd made a great point. It's not like back in the day. First of all, there aren't as many exclusives anymore because players can all put stuff out on their own, on their Instagram, their social media. Look at Jason Kelce and those guys. They all can announce anything they want to announce at any time. We're living in their world, the New Heights podcast. So it's just different now.
Yeah, I totally agree with all what you're saying. I don't know if you like. I can tell a story about how it was back in the day, and you guys probably know this story. And I won't mention any names, but there was a beat writer covered the Phillies for the Inquirer who a lot of people on the beat didn't think deserved that kind of promotion because they've been working all their life to get to. All of a sudden, he's the beat writer for the Phillies, and he was really lackadaisical in his coverage. He wasn't a hardcore guy, and so one night he missed the post-game press conference from the manager. And he went over and asked another guy on the beat to give him the highlights of that particular manager's post-game presser. And so the guy gave it to him. And when the guy who worked for the Inquirer got back to the press box, all the other writers found out. And the guy who gave him the information got hit in the head with a soda can. They threw a soda can at him for giving him the highlights of the press conference.
It was knockdown drag out for a long time. Like I said, like very early, there was some remnants from that when I started covering the Phillies, but nobody ever got hit in the head with a soda can.
It was vicious, man. They were so angry at that guy for giving the Inquirer guy the notes from the post game presser from the manager that they took it out on the guy who gave them the information.
Mike, is that where you have that little scar from?
It wasn't me. I was never a Philly beat writer, and I don't want to mention their names, but you guys have probably heard this story. And if I mention the names, you would probably know who it is. But one person is no longer with us, so that's why I don't want to bring it up. Listen, this was great, man. I really appreciate you guys doing this, taking time out of your day to do it. You'll have to go back to the sunset in Clearwater for Lauber and Zolecki, and have a cocktail at this particular time because you're all filed away. I get it. And Johnny, thank you for showing up. So Todd Zolecki, Scott Lauber, John Clark, thank you so much for being on the Mike Missanelli podcast. Really appreciate it.